My main message is to the parents of Trayvon Martin. You know, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon. And, you know, I think they are right to expect that all of us as Americans are going to take this with the seriousness it deserves, and that we're going to get to the bottom of exactly what happened.
Reaction to the Trayvon Martin case reached all the way to the White House tonight. For the first time, George Zimmerman's mother tells me what she knows about her son and what may have happened the night Trayvon Martin was shot. Gladys Zimmerman joins me now exclusively, along with George's brother, Robert, who's been one of my guests before. Welcome to you both. Gladys, you've asked us to keep your face in shadows to protect your identity, and we respect that. I'm aware that you haven't given any interviews before. Why do you want to talk out now?
I feel that it's about time, at the time that all this commotion was happening. We were forced to leave our home. We were forced to just disappear. And because of the death threats that we were getting, it was very dangerous for us to even to think about to come to defend our son.
Tell me, Gladys, when you think back to that night that Trayvon Martin was killed and you first discovered that George had fired the gun that killed him, how did you feel as his mother? What went through your mind in that moment?
At that moment, it felt like I couldn't believe what had happened. I felt that that the world had turned upside down. To me, it was like a nightmare. I just couldn't believe what had happened. I mean, to me, it was unbelievable. I was very sad. I was very sad for my son and for the person who had departed. Very, very sad.
I mean, so many lives have been affected and ruined by what's happened here. Obviously, George is facing a murder trial now. If he's convicted, he may face 25, 30 years in prison. Have you come to grips with that possibility?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question.
Have you come to terms with the possibility that George may go to prison for 25 or 30 years if he's found guilty?
I believe in the judicial system. I believe from the beginning that, you know, he is innocent. And I mean, the media had played a big role against my son. They had portrayed him in a bad picture. But there is justice in America, and I believe in justice.
Do you, as his mother, do you wish that George had never gone out carrying a gun that evening?
Mr. Morgan, there are so many things that we, you know, can wish as parents. But I will not answer to that question because I don't want, you know, people to elaborate of what, you know, the mother had said.
I mean, if you had the chance, Gladys, to talk to Trayvon Martin's parents, what would you say to them?
It was already said by a statement that my son had made public.
But I mean, how would you phrase it? What would you say as a mother to another mother who had lost her son?
That I'm deeply sorry for what it had happened. It is a tremendous tragedy for both families, and very sorry for the loss of their son.
Let me just ask Robert quickly. Robert, you've obviously, as a family, it's been hellish for you as well, and to say otherwise is to ignore the reality of your situation. You weren't there on the night, nor was your mother. How is George doing now? How is he coping with incarceration? How's he coping with the impending trial?
Well, he's not in incarceration right now. He's released. The order requires that he stay in Seminole County. So as you can imagine, that's a little bit restrictive.
But isn't it a form of incarceration? I mean, how free is he to go about?
That's right. That's exactly right. It is restrictive. He's free in one sense that he can meet with his attorneys. It's important that he participates in his defense and that he contributes any way that he can. But in a word, George would be recovering. He was diagnosed with PTSD. I told you that in March. Among other things that I told you, such as his injuries that appeared to you to not exist, based on that videotape that ABC released, based on a lot of things that people were releasing and saying that have now proven not to be true. So he's recovering from the world turning against him, the media barrage that convicted him ahead of time, and he hasn't been convicted of any crime. And I think that's a very hard reality to face every day for him.
Let's take a short break. We're going to come back and talk more to you, Robert, and to your mother, Gladys. I want to talk really about what life is like for you as the family of one of the most notorious figures in America right now, the death threats you've had and so on, and how you're dealing with it.
Hello, this is George Zimmerman. First and foremost, I want to thank you all for visiting therealgeorgezimmerman.com. We relaunched this website to once again thank you, my supporters. My intention was and still is to personally and individually thank you all. However, I wanted to take this opportunity to thank you, the masses.
George Zimmerman thanking his supporters. Back with me now is his mother, Gladys, who's asked us to keep her face in shadow to protect her identity. And here with me in the studio, George Zimmerman's brother, Robert. Welcome both to you again. Gladys, let me ask you a difficult question. If the situation had been reversed, if it had been George who was going back to visit a family relative, having gone to a store, who was unarmed, and he got into an altercation with somebody, Trayvon Martin, for argument's sake, and Trayvon Martin had produced a gun and shot your son dead, do you think you would feel differently about what happened?
Mr. Morgan, I don't want to touch anything that it has to do directly with the case. It's very important for me as a mother not to touch for the sanctity of the case, the prosecution and the defense, that I will rather not to talk about, anything that it will affect the case. I rather would like to talk about my son.
Yeah, tell me this
human
about
person that is son.
I understand, and I respect that you can't talk about the case. Let me ask you about George. What is the most annoying misconception that you keep having to hear or read about your son? Because some people see him as this brutal killer, a racist, somebody who, abused his ex-girlfriend, and so on. A lot of this must be very hurtful to you as his mother. What have been the things that have really upset you?
The most, that he was called racist. The most. That is something that, people who don't know George and people who knew George, they didn't bother to come up front and said, no, he's not racist. Let me mention one case, the case of Mr. Sherman Ware. He was a homeless African-American man who was beaten and hit, left unconscious on the pavement by a young man. Now this Mr. Ware, because he was homeless or because he was African-American, nobody defended him except my son. Mm. My son took the time to elaborate and to go and make flyers and go to churches, African-American churches, leave flyers on every car, stay there for every church session and pass flyers and get the community together to go to a council meeting back in 2011.
I mean, we have heard stories like this about George, and certainly many members of his family and friends have rushed to say he's not a racist. It doesn't mean
Yes.
it doesn't mean necessarily he didn't in some way, perhaps subliminally, racially profile Trayvon Martin. He saw a young black boy in an area where there had been burglaries, and he didn't think the worst. It may have been that that was the case. We may never know the answer to that. Tell me this, on a wider point, do you think that regardless of what happens in this case, would you like to see tougher gun control laws in America?
Excuse me. It's hard to tell. I'm not into a study for that law, but I have to tell you that there is more people being killed. Excuse me. There's more people being killed by guns where the state had, have a regulation for gun control. That's what I have learned. Right now I'm not in a position to say, oh yeah, let's do this, let's do that with gun control. I'm sorry, my head is
okay.
is someplace else.
I understand. We have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me. I do appreciate it's taken a lot of courage on your part to do this, and that you're concerned about your security and that of your family. So I appreciate you joining me now, and you too, Robert. Good to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
Coming